Your enemies don't want to fight you. They want something far more effective. They want to get inside your head. They provoke you just enough to trigger emotion, bait you into explaining yourself, and push you to react in public, knowing that the moment you do, you lose status. Most people think power is loud. They think dominance comes from aggression, confidence, and clever comebacks. It doesn't. Real power is psychological. If someone can control your emotions, they can control your behavior, your reputation, and eventually your position in every room you walk into. That's why the people who oppose you don't attack your skills. They attack your composure. They want you angry, defensive, and off balance, because the more you react, the easier you are to move. 500 years ago, a man wrote down what most people still refuse to accept. His name was Machiavelli. He understood something modern self-help completely misses. You don't defeat the people who try to control you by arguing with them, exposing them, or seeking revenge. You defeat them by removing your mind from their reach entirely. Before we go further, understand this clearly. This isn't about cruelty or becoming a manipulator. It's about no longer being available to be manipulated. There is a difference between weaponizing people and refusing to be weaponized by them. This is about the second. There are 5 strategies that quietly neutralize the people who try to provoke you, without raising your voice, without confronting them directly, and without ever giving them the satisfaction of knowing you noticed. Stay until the end, because once you understand how this works, you will never see conflict the same way again. The first mistake most people make is believing conflict begins when words are exchanged. It doesn't. Conflict begins the moment you react. Reaction is not neutral, it is information. Every emotional response you give, whether irritation, defense, sarcasm, or explanation, teaches the other person exactly what works on you, what touches a nerve, what pressure to apply next time. This is why provocateurs repeat the same behavior, not because they enjoy it, but because it works. Most people believe reacting is strength and silence is weakness. The opposite is true. The person who reacts first accepts the role of the responder. They are no longer shaping reality. They are moving inside someone else's agenda. This is psychological submission, disguised as assertiveness. When you remove your immediate reaction, something uncomfortable happens in the other person's mind. They lose feedback. Their behavior no longer produces predictable results, and without data, they begin to guess. Guessing creates anxiety, and anxiety creates mistakes. Think about a man at work with a rival who takes calculated shots at him in meetings, subtle digs, backhanded compliments. For years, he responded, sometimes calmly, sometimes sharply, but always something. Then he stopped. The next dig came. He didn't respond. He didn't even look up. Within a month, the rival had escalated, louder, more obvious, almost desperate. Within 3 months, the rival had stopped entirely, because the man had become unreadable. If they can't read you, they can't predict you. And the people who once played you lose the only tool they ever had. Once you stop reacting, the second strategy begins working on its own. Silence is not passive. It is pressure without direction. It forces the other person to fill the gap with their own projections. They replay conversations, invent motives, and escalate internally while you remain still. The mind cannot tolerate ambiguity. When given no information, it manufactures its own. And the information it manufactures is almost always worse than the truth. Most people, when wronged, immediately want to clarify and set the record straight. This is the urge the provocateur relies on. The moment you explain yourself, you hand them a map of how you think, what you fear, and what they need to push next time. Refusing to clarify is not arrogance. It is withholding the map. Think about a woman who had been quietly excluded from a friend group. Whispers, canceled invitations, the slow, deliberate freeze-out. Her instinct was to call, ask, and make sure there hadn't been a misunderstanding. She didn't. She said nothing. No effort to clarify, confront, or win them back. Within weeks, the group had begun speculating about her, second-guessing themselves, wondering what she knew that they didn't. The dynamic flipped completely, not because she did anything, but because she did nothing. And nothing, in the right hands, is the loudest move on the board. That is the second strategy. You let their imagination do the work you used to do for them, and someone left alone with their own thoughts usually defeats themselves. Strategy 1 removed your reaction. Strategy 2, let their imagination run. Strategy 3 closes the theater entirely. Some people don't need your reaction to keep functioning. They need your attention. A rival mentioned in conversation is still a rival being elevated. Someone you complain about is still occupying real estate in your life. Machiavelli understood that influence requires presence. Remove the presence, and influence collapses. There is a difference between ignoring someone out of weakness and ignoring someone because they no longer occupy a position in your mind worth addressing. The first is avoidance. The second is dismissal. And real, internal dismissal is something they can feel. It humiliates them in a way no confrontation ever could, because confrontation says you matter enough to fight, while dismissal says you were never the threat you imagined yourself to be. Think about two former colleagues who had a falling out. One spent the next 2 years bringing the other up at parties and in meetings. He thought he was warning people. What he was actually doing was keeping his rival alive in every room he walked into. The other said nothing for 2 years. Not a comment, not a hint, not a single mention. Within that same period, one man became known as the guy who was still angry about that thing. The other became known for everything he had built. That is the third strategy. You stop giving them airtime, and without airtime, even the loudest voice quietly disappears. Strategy 3 removed them from your life. Strategy 4 lets them remove themselves from everyone else's. Most people believe wrongdoers need to be exposed, that you must reveal what they did and defend your name. The dangerously intelligent know better. People who behave badly almost always expose themselves if you give them enough time and enough silence. The same patterns that hurt you will surface with someone else. The same manipulation will be tried on the wrong person. But this only happens if you stop interrupting the process. When you defend yourself loudly, you give them a villain to point at. When you stay silent, they have no villain. And eventually, they become the only character left in the story. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like that." Most people read this as moral advice. It is also strategic advice. When you don't behave like them, the contrast becomes visible to everyone watching without you having to point at it. Think about a man wronged by a business partner who told the story first, badly and in his own favor, to anyone who would listen. The man's instinct was to call every mutual contact and set the record straight. He didn't. He simply continued working and conducting himself the way he always had. 2 years later, the partner had burned through 3 more relationships the same way. By then, no one needed the man's version. They had watched the truth unfold on its own. That is the fourth strategy. You stop fighting for the narrative, and you let time and their own behavior write the ending. This is the final strategy, and the one that makes everything before it permanent. Machiavelli observed something in courts and wars that still applies in every modern environment. In any group of people, there is always a reference point. The person whose composure sets the standard, whose reaction everyone watches before deciding their own. That position is rarely earned by being the loudest. It is almost always earned by being the most unmoved. The one who remains calm under provocation becomes the reference point. The one who reacts becomes secondary. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the best weapon against the world was an ungovernable inner state, a mind no insult could enter, a composure no provocation could crack. This is what becomes intolerable to the people who once tried to move you, not your success or your achievements, but your unreachability. Because what they wanted, the entire reason they engaged you, was access to your reactions, your emotions, and your sense of self. The moment they realize they will never get it, they don't just lose the battle, they lose the appetite for it entirely. The dangerously intelligent withdrew their participation years ago and discovered something that took most people a lifetime to learn. You don't have to defeat anyone. You just have to stop showing up to the war they need you to fight. You become unreadable. You let them imagine. You withdraw the stage. You let their behavior expose them. You become the reference point. And one day, you look up and realize the people who once occupied so much of your mind have become nothing more than background noise in a life you built without them. Not because you crushed them or exposed them or won, but because you stopped giving them the only thing they ever wanted from you, your reaction. If something in this video felt familiar, if you recognized a person, a pattern, or a relationship that has lived too long inside your head, then this channel was made for you. Subscribe and walk this road with us, because every week we go deeper into the kind of wisdom most people only find after they have already been controlled by it for too long. I will see you next time.